on a morning like today, it's overcast, we can't see the sun, and then all of a sudden, the fog lifts, and the light breaks through, and we can see. And we see a choice that stands before us. And today's gospel stories reveal such moments. Jesus is walking toward Jerusalem when some Pharisees, some religious leaders who Jesus had an intense relationship with, in a lot of ways he was very much like the Pharisees, and he was also challenging them. And the Pharisees approached Jesus with a warning. Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you. It's a reasonable concern. Herod has already separated the head of John the Baptist from the rest of his body. Herod is a killer. But Jesus doesn't run. Instead, he sends back a message that's breathtaking. Go and tell that fox, I'm casting out demons, performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day, I finish my work. Tell that fox. He doesn't say, tell His Royal Majesty, tell that lion, tell that king. He says, tell that fox. What do you know about foxes? They probably knew a lot more about foxes than most of us know. I don't think many of us are living out in rural areas with, farm animals to protect and foxes coming up. Foxes were known as being sly, destructive predators who raid the hen house while the world sleeps. And Jesus keeps walking straight toward the danger. And then the next thing he says, he's Jerusalem that kills the prophets. Then he starts to weep for Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets. How often have I longed to gather your children under my wings? Like a hen gathers her brood, her little chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. In one breath, Jesus names Herod as a fox and names himself as a mother hen. And in doing so, I think he presents us with the most basic choice, moment to moment in our lives. What power will you live by? The power of the fox or the power of the mother hen? I mean, we all know about foxes, metaphorically speaking, don't we? The world runs on their power. Then and now. The power of tooth and claw. The power that takes what it wants and leaves blood in its wake. When Jesus calls Herod a fox, he's naming something we all recognize. The kind of power that mistakes dominance for strength, that believes the one with the most fangs wins. In ancient worlds, kings likened themselves to lions, majestic, lordly. But Jesus sees through the royal propaganda to the fox beneath, calculating, destructive, not interested in protection, but in possession. We see it in our own times too. This fox-like power strutting across the world stage. We see it in leaders who treat democracy like a personal fiefdom, in businesses that devour communities and spit them out like bones, in the casual cruelty that passes for strength and cleverness on social media. You with me? But here's what Jesus understood. The fox's power is ultimately hollow. The violence only begets more violence. It can tear down, but it can't build up. It can command bodies, but it cannot win hearts. The fox will always be hungry, always be hunting, always be alone. Of all the images Jesus could have chosen for himself, the Lion of Judah, an avenging eagle, a conquering king, he chooses a mother hen. And in such a patriarchal time, a mother hen? Are you kidding me? We're going to get behind a mother hen? A creature whose power lies not in her claws and in her fangs, but in her ferocious, loving grace. Her nurturing love, her self-sacrificing love. How many of you have ever watched a mother hen with her chicks? A couple of you? Yeah, I grew up, the suburbs around us, they were pretty rural, Barrington, Rhode Island, where I grew up. And there were some farms in the areas, and one of our science teachers had a farm, and we'd go out and watch for hours his goats and cows and chicks and chickens. And so what happens when danger threatens? A mother hen doesn't save her own feathery body. She makes herself bigger, she fluffs up. She gets really large, and her wings outstretch, and it's as if, the first time I saw this, it was like she was devouring her little chicks. You couldn't see them. They were in her body. Her body became like a living sanctuary, holding her babies. Putting her body on the line, like skin in the game, standing there to defend her chicks with her very life. It was like the most courageous, gutsiest, literally gutsiest experience I've ever seen, with the willingness to protect, to lay her body on the line. And this mother hen, what did she have? She doesn't have fierce claws, she doesn't have fangs, she has her body. The vulnerability of her body. And her defense isn't to attack, it's to gather. Like the woodlands this morning, gathering around for love. It is love that's bringing them together to celebrate Francis's birthday. Georgia, sorry. Did it again. They're both kind of androgynous names. I'm so sorry. Yeah. It's love, gathering together. I can't believe you're all here this morning. Yeah. And this is the image that Jesus chooses for divine power. Not power over, power with. Not power that demands, but power that invites. Not power that breaks, but power that holds. I mean, thinking about those times, thousands of years ago in a very different patriarchal culture, It's kind of a shockingly feminine image, maternal image, especially in a world where God, Lord, Sovereign, King, it was all masculine terms to describe the deity. And yet here's Jesus, identifying himself with the feminine, with maternal power that creates and nurtures and transforms through fierce tenderness rather than force. When my sister Karen was in labor with her first child, I was there. And as the pain started to intensify, her eyes started to widen with fear. And the midwife took her hand and said, I know you want this to stop, but the only way through to the other side is through it. Don't run from the pain. Move toward it. Breathe into it. And she didn't want to take the drugs. Breathe into it. My sister nodded, gathered her courage, and with each contraction, instead of tensing up against the pain, she breathed into it. And she kept whispering to herself. She's not a screamer. She said, the only way out is through. The only way out is through. The spiritual journey, the human story, the pain of being alive and the joy of it asks us to keep walking, to walk straight toward and through whatever most frightens us. This morning's beautiful music, sometimes I feel like a motherless child, to walk through those terrifying places, not around it, through it. To face the foxes of our lives, not by becoming foxes ourselves, but by standing our ground with wings spread wide, which requires us to expose our hearts, to risk having our hearts broken. Jesus walks toward Jerusalem, toward danger, not because he doesn't understand the threat, because there's another Jesus saying, be as wise as a serpent and as innocent as the dove. He knows what's going on, he names it, but it doesn't stop him. Because he sees through it, he sees beyond pain. And he refuses to let his fear dictate his path. He refuses to become what he opposes. This pattern of walking through fear toward promise, it isn't unique to Jesus. Centuries earlier, in that other kind of gory, perplexing story about Abram, we find Abram standing under a desert sky. And it's a story that Jesus, Rabbi Jesus, of course, knew. He's standing under a desert sky and he's questioning God's long-delayed promise. What will you give me? Abram asks, for I continue childless. It's a legitimate question. He and his wife are way beyond childbearing years. It's like an impossibility. You promised. I thought you promised. It's actually a really vulnerable, raw question from a powerful patriarch, naked with disappointment. It's the kind of question we ask when life really starts to wear us down. When promises seem to have grown brittle, when it's hard to find hope. And like us, Abram stands at the edge of our own abyss, unable to see how things will unfold. We keep walking forward, not knowing. And God's response to this, at that time as well, where God could seem as it's like a warrior God, a terrifying God. God is remarkable in this power that's not power over, but it's tenderness. There's a moment of intimacy. Behold the stars. It's not an I-it experience, it's an I-thou. It's like we don't have a glimpse of what it's like because we live with so much light pollution, but to be in those places where it is so dark and you look up and you can see the Milky Way galaxy, you can see more. It takes you to a place where there's no past. It's past, present, and future. Maybe these days it takes seeing a solar eclipse to be just blown away, all the categories that we have to describe what we think we know. And we surrender into it. So who knows if this was real or if it was just Abram outside asking this question? How long, God? How long? And he's moved by the experience of beholding the stars. And he hears, so too this promise, numerous as the stars will your descendants be. And he believes it. But he still has questions. So he says, how am I going to know that this covenant's going to happen? How am I to know? And God responds with covenant. This ritual where animals are cut in half and a smoking fire pot passes between them. We look at that now and it's like, what? Was God requiring animal sacrifice? What does that say about our perception of God? It's like the farm animals, what? And then we get into these details, but the birds were not cut, the smaller animals were protected. What is with this? But this wasn't just symbolic. What it represented basically was God saying, may I be cut in half if I break this promise with you. Talk about skin in the game again. God was saying, I have skin in the game. That's my promise. And the text tells us that this deep, terrifying darkness descended on Abram. God doesn't spare Abram, or spare us really, from walking in the terrifying darkness. Instead, God walks through it with him, with us. God is more like that mother hen than we might imagine. Like the mother hen, God doesn't promise Abram that there will be no foxes. God promises to spread protection as they face the foxes together. Some of you might be wondering, why do we learn these old stories? What does it have to do with us now, here in 2025? In 2025, I think we find ourselves in our own deep and terrifying darkness. Our institutions are buckling. Our communities are fragmenting. It's like we never recovered from COVID. We're scattered. We're more scattered than ever. We're isolated in social media that just isolates us further with the algorithms. We feel like scattered chicks with foxes circling. And the world seems to be increasingly dominated by those who wield power as a weapon, who see compassion as weakness, who believe that the only response to threat is greater threat. Escalation of violence. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child in the face of it. Vulnerable like a chick. What can we do? Who will protect us? Who will save us? And I'm also tempted. I'm tempted to run away, save myself, become a fox. It's tempting, isn't it? To think the only way to survive is to grow fangs, get a gun. It's scary. Or harden our hearts, close, shut down. Just me, huh? I'm the only one. That's why I do these sermons. To fight back. To use violence. But these stories suggest another way. A revolutionary way to face a predator fox with the love of a mother hen. You know, biologists categorize different kinds of animals, and among the predators, foxes won't just stop. Most animals will just kill what they want to eat. Foxes are different. Foxes will slaughter all the little chicks in the hen house. It's like, it's a killing spree. It's almost like a pleasure of, it's not just for food, it's for destruction or play. And to face that can be terrifying, especially to face it non-violently. And I think we kid ourselves if we think we're not afraid. I mean, we're sitting here under the protection of sanctuary in one another, but it's real. And Jesus knew it. I think so many of us are so terrified of vulnerability. We're so afraid of being vulnerable and embraced by God, by one another, that we create an image, a very masculine, muscular, militant image of Jesus to become more like Herod or Caesar. White Christian nationalism's all about that. Power over. Force is power. Might makes right. And it's kind of scary to look at this country and how fox-like we have been in our foreign policies, how fox-like we have been for centuries. And the propaganda of wanting to protect all the vulnerable chicks. And then the same thing with Christianity, the version of Christianity that sings onward Christian soldiers marching on to war. It's like victor, Christ the King. To the point where Jesus wouldn't recognize it. Jesus wouldn't Rabbi Jesus wouldn't recognize the institution that was created in his name and then perverted, co-opted to serve the antithesis of what he was teaching. The fox represents all the power that threatens us. The hen is a different kind of power. Mother love, protective love. And Jesus refuses to be intimidated. What does it take to live like that? To keep on loving, to keep on doing the work of healing, to keep on refusing to become what he doesn't want to become, refusing to match violence with violence, but to respond with love. I think that's what courage is. It's not the absence of fear, so if you're feeling afraid, that's okay. It's the strength to keep walking forward toward our ideals, even though we're afraid, to keep breathing through it, seeing what's on the other side, standing your ground. It's Abram saying yes to a promise he cannot see fulfilled. It's the immigrant mother who crosses the deserts for her children. It's the teacher who puts her body in front of her students to protect them from danger. I'm sure you can think of many other examples of what that kind of love looks like. And it's all of us when we choose to respond to hatred and violence with courage, with tenderness, with love. And some of you might be thinking, great, sounds nice, what a fantasy, let's get real. It seems like the fox wins, doesn't it? It seems like the fox is winning now, the foxes. And sometimes mother hens die protecting their little vulnerable, beloved children. This is the cost. But here's the promise if we see it through. The victory of violence is always temporary. It never brings about resolution. It just begets more violence. The fox can kill the hen, but it can never kill what that hen stood for. It can never kill it. Think of the hens that we remember thousands of years after they laid their lives for the causes that they cared about. Who we don't remember and who we do remember. In Genesis, God says to Abram, "Do not be afraid, I am your shield." It's not a shield that protects us and blocks out all pain, but it's a promise to walk with us through the darkness, to birth, to new life on the other side. So what does this mean for us? As foxes prowl around in our times, just like they prowled around in Jesus' time, just like they prowled around in Abram's time. What does it mean in this wilderness that we live in? do we navigate? I think the first thing for me that these stories speak about is it's important to name what it is we fear. It starts to lose some power to name it. What makes you want to go numb or run away or show your fangs? Name it. And then I think it's being able to breathe into it and not react out of violence, but respond with tenderness. What's the vulnerability underneath that terror, that anger, that hatred? It's a love that's not passive. It's a love that is active, nonviolent, courageous, tender, protecting the vulnerable, the chicks, the little ones. It's taking a stand for the ideals that you want to live by in spite of your fear. And then finally, it's becoming more of that gatherer, gathering the chicks under your wings, the tender vulnerability. And I've seen it here in services. We've had some people over the years who, in the middle of the service, something happens. Remember Ginger Grove all of a sudden said, I can't see out of one of my eyes, or Mike was having a little bit of we weren't sure if you were fainting or what, but one of us calls an ambulance, one of us holds a hand, one of us says a prayer, we gather. It's a human experience. We remember our connection, which is everything in times like that. The only way out is through. To see it through to the other side. When Abram stood looking at that star-filled sky with wonder, nothing short of wonder, he said yes. Because it was far greater and more beautiful, and somehow he knew it was part of it, not separate, gathered. And when Jesus faced Herod's threat, he spread his wings wider. May we have the courage to let this fierce tenderness embrace us, to open ourselves to our own vulnerability, and to ask to be gathered, to be willing to say yes. And in that, through that, with that, together we may transform the world, one moment, one person, one community at a time. Amen.